Hi, this is Mark Farnham with Apologetics for the Church, and with me today again is Jeff Mindler, our newly anointed Director of Research and Intern Development. So he's been promoted to director level, and of course with that comes the 401k and insurance and all that. Not really, we don't have that for anyone, but Jeff has been with this ministry for years now and has done an amazing job in research and also overseeing our interns. And so now he's been promoted to Director of Research and Intern Development. And for the last few months, you've been leading our local interns. We now have local and regional interns. You've been leading the local interns in a study of Jehovah's Witness cult in preparation for something. So break down, first of all, what is Jehovah's Witness? And then tell us about the training that you gave our interns and then the event you prepared for.
Yeah, so the original idea for this was to provide more explicit apologetic opportunities for our interns, to train them in having these conversations with people, how to share the gospel with various different groups of people. And one of the first ones we chose was the Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a decent population of Jehovah's Witnesses here in Lancaster County, and so we thought it'd be a great opportunity. And so what I did was crafted an 8-week plan where we picked a textbook written by a gentleman named Ron Rhodes, who has done a very in-depth study and analysis of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And we worked through that book over an 8-week period. We also looked at primary source documents for the Jehovah's Witnesses to learn from them, from direct sources. What do they say? What do they teach? To get the best grasp of who these people are, what they believe, what's their history, and with the express intent on reaching them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that culminated on April 2nd. They had their big event of the year, which is they call it the Memorial of Jesus' Death. So it's the commemoration of the Last Supper, where all the witnesses gather together and celebrate this around the world. And they open it to outsiders, individuals, anyone can come. And so we thought, hey, this is a great opportunity to both learn and observe, learn more direct hand what they believe, and then have conversations with them, as many as we could after the service, to try to reach them with the true gospel of Jesus Christ.
Good.
So that was the broad overview of this new initiative we did over the last 8 weeks.
So for those who aren't familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, just give us an overview of the religion, quick history, and then core ideas or beliefs.
Yeah, so the Jehovah's Witnesses were started in the 19th century, so 1800s, by a gentleman named Charles Taze Russell, and they were a Christian, and still are, a cult. They said they believed the Bible, but deny some core teachings of historic Christianity. And they've gone through several presidents over the years. Joseph Rutherford was the big one in the early 20th century who really hardened and established what we know today as Jehovah's Witnesses, some of the common practices that, door-to-door, proselytizing, publishing, as they would say, some of the policies on, blood transfusion, that sort of thing. But a lot of their major beliefs, so, they started in the 1800s, still exist today. And so some of their core beliefs would be they believe that the Father alone is Jehovah. Jesus is a created being, specifically with them. He is Michael, the archangel. So he's a created being. Their understanding, the Holy Spirit is an impersonal active force. So similar to the electricity, say, running through our sign here, that's what the Holy Spirit is akin to, is this impersonal active force. So he's not a personal being, certainly not Jehovah. And they believe, salvation, they have the 2-tier system where you have the anointed class. Those are people, the 144,000. If you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, you've probably heard something about the 144,000 because that's a key teaching of theirs. But they believe that only 144,000 individuals will reign with Christ in heaven, and then the rest, what they would call the great cloud, they will remain on a paradise earth. So Jehovah's Witnesses, if you're one of them, most likely you're going to be the great crowd, living on the paradise earth. But if you're in the 144,000 anointed class, you'll be reigning with Christ in heaven.
And they get that 144,000 number from the book of Revelation.
Correct.
And for them, that is the cream of the crop as far as Jehovah's Witnesses go.
Yeah. Yep. So those would be those who have that heavenly calling, as they would say. They are of the anointed class. They have Jesus as their mediator. They are in the new covenant. Everyone else, if you're a part of the great crowd, you're not in the new covenant. You don't have Jesus as your mediator. The benefits you get flow from the heavenly crowd.
No kidding. So the 144,000 are mediators in essence.
So I don't think they would say in a strict sense that there's an indirect benefit that the great crowd gets from them.
Okay.
But you can start to see, as we just unpack this, how different it is from historic Orthodox Christianity, whether it's around the doctrine of the Trinity, one God who eternally exists as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, our understanding of salvation and the eternal state. You can start to see very quickly where we diverge on some major points.
Yeah. And in the intern training, you invited one of our friends and board members, Andrew Keenan, who did his PhD at Cambridge University in England, to talk about the name Jehovah, because that really matters to them, right?
Yes.
You're supposed to pronounce God's name as Jehovah.
Right.
And what did Andrew have to teach you and the interns on that issue?
Yeah, Andrew did a fantastic job doing a very deep dive into the history and origins of the divine name drawn from the Old Testament, how that's come down to us through the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, into modern translations, and really showing how the name Jehovah itself could not have been the original divine name when you get into the Hebrew alphabet, vowel pointing, all those sorts of things. It's very technical, but and to summarize it, Jehovah could not have been that original name. And he did a fantastic job just unpacking the Tetragrammaton, how we understand that from the Old Testament.
Right, and the 4 Hebrew letters that make up God's name.
Yeah, Yod, He, Vav, He.
Right, the correct pronunciation would be Yahweh, or
yes.
Yahweh.
Yeah, as best as we can approximate.
And the problem with Jehovah's Witnesses, they say not only do you have to use the correct name, you have to pronounce it correctly, correct?
Yes, and they believe they are the only group on earth that actually knows the divine name. So if you use the name Jehovah, you might surprise some of them because they think they're the only group that actually knows what God's name is.
What else did you find in studying Jehovah's Witnesses that's different and a departure from historic Christianity?
So, and this was leading up to this memorial supper where they did a brief message and then they passed the elements, the bread and the wine. And what's very peculiar, this is going to stand out to Orthodox historic Christianity, is that they teach that only those who are of the anointed class, the 144,000, only they can partake of the elements. And so what happens in most either kingdom halls, or in this instance, it was in a hotel ballroom downtown Lancaster, and so bigger space. What happens in most cases is that the elements get passed and no one touches them. They don't partake, they don't drink, because
they don't want to be presumptuous that they're of the anointed class.
You don't want to presume that you are of the anointed class. And so most of the time they go from the front all the way to the back and nobody's touched them. Now,
but tell us
this is, I can only chalk this up to God's providence over this, because the percentage of this, so they haven't released this year's numbers, 2026, but last year's numbers, they had something around 20 million observers of the memorial supper, which is significant because there's only about 9 million Jehovah's Witnesses. So again, it's one of their bigger events where they have guests come. And of that group, of the 20 million, about 24,000 people partook of the elements.
Wow.
So when you do the math, it's like less than 1%. I think it's a 0.1%, so a tenth of a percentage actually partake. So the chances are very small. And wouldn't you know, when we go to this event to observe, the lady sitting next to us partakes.
And the only one in
the entire room. So at this big ballroom, there's probably 300, 350 maybe. And wouldn't you know, the lady next to us partakes. And what was kind of funny was the usher that was passing the elements had this visible look of shock on his face.
I would imagine you would.
And so
he's looking at an anointed 144,000.
Yes.
That's probably rare in your lifetime.
Yes. Yeah. When you think about the percentages, it would be incredibly rare. Now, what was great, and this is why I'm so glad that we were able to do this 8-week training with our interns, is one of the interns who was sitting the closest to her, she was maybe 2 or 3 chairs over. He immediately turns to me and he nudges me to say hey, look, she's partaking. And he immediately says, I need to talk with her afterwards. And so it led to this great conversation where he made a beeline for her afterwards and immediately struck up a conversation. So it led very naturally into a conversation of the gospel, of what Christ has done, of how she knows, apparently she's in the anointed class. And it was just so great to see our interns, in action, open Bible in hand, going with in the text with these folks. So that was wild, that of all the seats that we chose, this lady next to us was making this claim that she was in the anointed class. And
it's interesting to think that if 24,000 partook of this supper, memorial supper, last year, that would be about 6 or 7% of the 144,000, which means that there's a good number of people today living who think they're part of the 144,000, which has existed. When did Jehovah's Witness start? Early mid 1800s?
Mid to later 1800s.
Okay, 150 years. That 7% of them are alive today.
Well, and
that's interesting.
And it'd actually be you'd span that over the 2,000 years of church history.
Oh,
okay. So the number actually, when you consider that, the number is even more ridiculous. So
it's not since the Jehovah's Witnesses started.
This would be since the time of the apostles.
Wow. So there's some presumptuous Jehovah's Witnesses out there that.
Well,
statistically, it's unlikely that 7% are alive today.
Well, particularly when you add this additional layer, which is not talked about as much today. But so the second president of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Joseph Rutherford, he taught that Jehovah stopped calling people into the anointed class in 1935. So when you do the math, you begin to realize either these individuals need to be very, very old to be in the anointed class, and she did not meet that age requirement.
Okay, you have to be at least 91 years old.
At least, and she was not. In 2007, they began subtly changing that policy to kind of downplay it. So you can see the Watchtower kind of shifting and changing some of their policies on this. But it is one of those, in a cult group like this, where some of their past leaders have made very strong, pronouncements, false predictions. It's one of those that a lot of witnesses have to wrestle and deal with today. And oftentimes, that's actually one of the first cracks that starts forming in the foundation when witnesses can question the trustworthiness of their leaders. And so there's a lot of interesting things happening modern day Jehovah's Witnesses. And we wanted to reach them with the gospel. We wanted to get straight into who is Jesus and what has he done, because we realize that is the big dividing line. All those other issues, they can be fun to talk about, but at the end of the day, one of the things I trained our interns on was get them to Jesus as quickly as you can. And the truth, because they have a false Christ. They have a Christ that cannot save them. And so we want to get to the heart of the gospel, the heart of who Jesus truly is, because we believe the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, and that God can bring even people that are caught in a very controlling cult group he can bring them out through the truth of the gospel. And so we explicitly trained our interns with that in mind of like, let's get them into the text to wrestle with, the fact that, as I say, Jesus is Jehovah. And if you can show them that from their own translation, the New World Translation, which is not a good translation, but it's got its weaknesses. And if you can show them from their own Bible where it teaches that Jesus is God, Jesus is Jehovah, the argument's over.
That's good. Jeff, what makes the Jehovah's Witnesses a cult and not a denomination?
Yeah, so a couple of factors there. One, their departure from Orthodox Christian teaching, specifically around some of those key issues regarding the Trinity, the deity of Christ. So departure from Orthodox Christianity is one big factor. Another big factor would be the control structure and system that they have, where they control a lot of the information, a lot of the behavior that goes on with the witnesses, with the members, some of the policies that they have, which can have very, very destructive and unfortunate effects, such as their blood transfusion policy that has literally led to, unfortunately, the deaths of several people. So there's a lot of factors that go in there. Stephen Hassan, he's a world-renowned cult expert. He calls this, to identify cults, he refers to it as his BITE model. And what that stands for is behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And what you'll see in a lot of cults is they will try to control those various factors. And typically, if a group checks those boxes, they typically fall into that category of a cult.
Good. Is door-to-door, you said they call it publishing. Interesting. Is door-to-door required in Jehovah's Witnesses?
So this is an interesting piece of recent development.
Let me just interrupt. What I mean by door-to-door, if you're not familiar, it's going door-to-door in a neighborhood, knocking on the door, seeking to share the claims of Jehovah's Witnesses with people in the same way that Christians went door-to-door for more than 100 years evangelizing.
Yeah. Now, for the witnesses, traditionally it was you had to go door-to-door for a certain number of hours every month. That could vary. The last I saw, it was about 10, although they've recently changed this. But they would go to be considered an active publisher, somebody who is actively publishing, putting forth the message of the Watchtower. They would have to do that for at least 10 hours a month to be considered, I guess, what we would call in good standing. Now, there's some interesting recent changes that have happened where they've gotten a little loose on the specific hours, and now it's kind of you could check the box if you've done your field service ministry.
Okay.
But historically, there was a time requirement that was associated with that. So when you would see witnesses, going door to door, or if they're outside of a Lowe's or a Home Depot or town square,
on a street corner in Lancaster,
an airport, you'd see them with their stands where they'd have Watchtower and Awake literature to hand out. So that could count as well. That was a big part of the Watchtower organization.
And is that part of, in Jehovah's Witnesses, is there an element of earning by your own merit your salvation in some way?
So there is a very much a works emphasis there, where you need to be considered good standing, an active publisher. You need to be doing this, and this to be considered one of Jehovah's Witnesses, because you don't want to forsake him, and then Armageddon breaks out and you're not one of his faithful witnesses. So there is very much an emphasis on works, and this is what I must do, to the point of, during this memorial supper, it was interesting to hear the people speaking about what it looks like to be a faithful Jehovah's Witness. And in debriefing with our interns, one of the things that I highlighted was, did you guys notice how much law there was in the sense of doing this, do this, do this. But there was no gospel. There was no, this is what Christ has done, his finished work, rest and receive and believe it. There's no assurance in that regard. So very much, a works, which is typically another sign of, a cult-based religion is typically there's going to be a heavy emphasis on works. Do this, do this, do this to remain in good standing. And there's no gospel. There's no finished work of Christ, which is why we need to take the gospel to these individuals.
Yes. There's hopelessly lost as a Roman Catholic, as a Mormon, as a Muslim, because all those religions include belief, but works as well. And if it requires, as we're told in the New Testament, any amount of requirement from our works, we're going to fail and fall short, and therefore there's no hope. There's only fear of judgment.
Yeah. And for anyone that wants to come in on the comments of, questioning why would we do this? Why would we go to interrupt their service? Firstly, we didn't interrupt.
Right. We were invited.
We were invited, and we watched for the whole service, and then it was afterwards that we engaged. And most of the people actually came up to us and wanted to have a conversation with us.
Because you were new.
Yes,
we were not part
new.
of the recognizable group.
And the other thing, too, is, again, we believe what Scripture says, that there is no other gospel than the one that we find in Scripture, and the Jesus they have is a false Christ. And so the most loving thing we could do for these people is to tell them about the true Christ, tell them about his true gospel. So we did not go in with this idea of we're going to win an argument. We're just going to look how much smarter we are. No, we went in recognizing, Lord, only you can take out hearts of stone and give hearts of flesh. Use us, your weak and feeble instruments, as best as we can to bring the true gospel to these people, and we leave the results in his hands. And so that's why we went. We went to engage them with the gospel because we believe it is truly good news. It's good news.
So tell us about the conversations afterward.
Yeah. So we had several conversations going on because there were 3 of us in total. And so at any given time, there was at times 3 conversations, one-on-one. And then as one would wrap up, we'd kind of cluster together. And so there was a number, the one intern, he was engaging with the lady who partook, saying she's of the 144,000. And he was really kind of pressing her of, how do you know that you're a part of the 144,000? How is that something that you know? And her response was very subjective because it has to be in their teaching. But then just pressing some of the claims of previous Jehovah's Witnesses, like Joseph Rutherford, who claimed that God stopped calling the anointed class in 1935, and kind of, are you familiar with what Joseph Rutherford said? And she was not.
Interesting.
So it was one of those, hey, would you consider this further? One conversation I had actually with her husband, we on the side, I was talking with him about, because I wanted to get right into, I know here's where I'm coming from, my background, and I know one of the key differences between us is on the person of Christ. And I said, would you be willing to have a conversation about why I believe the Bible teaches that Jesus is God, Jesus is Jehovah? And he was, yeah, we can talk about that. And so we went right into the text, and this is the strategy. I've used this a number of times and found it to be very effective, and train the interns to do this as well.
You're using the New World Translation,
yes.
Their translation.
Yes, because this is one of the areas where the New World Translation does a lot to try to hide the deity of Christ in key texts, but it doesn't do it consistently. And if you know where those weaknesses are, you can exploit them, and it's a very powerful technique because.
And do you get into the corrupted nature of the New World Translation as well, or you just stick with their translation and don't go beyond that?
So in my conversations, I tend to not highlight that because a lot of times their defensive mechanisms can kick in. But I know if I can at least plant that seed of doubt by showing them directly in the text where the deity of Christ is clearly attested to, that is a far more powerful, because they're seeing it firsthand.
Right.
And so I found that to be a really powerful technique. And so, we dive right into the text, Psalm 102, 25 through 27, establish what it's talking about, who is it talking about, what is it teaching, and it's a text about Jehovah. And it could only be true of Jehovah once you read it. And then we go to Hebrews 1, and the author of Hebrews 1 in verses 8 through 12 quotes that very passage in Psalm 102, but he says it's about the Son. And so the power there is the writer of Hebrews quotes this passage that they said could only be true of Jehovah. And the writer of Hebrews says and applies it to the Son. And what's really powerful there is even in their own Bible, it has the cross references. And the Hebrews 1 text, specifically verses 10 through 12, references back to Psalm 102.
In their translation?
In their translation. So
can I read Psalm 102?
Yeah,
Which verse is it?
25 through 27.
Psalm 102, 25. Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will change them like a robe, and they will pass away. But you are the same, and your years have no end. The children of your servants shall dwell secure. Their offspring shall be established before you. And then if we move forward to Hebrews 1, which verses?
So specifically 8 through 12, but,
Okay.
or 10 through 12.
10 through 12.
Verse 8 highlights that he's speaking of the Son. So
Of
that's
this-
why.
Yeah, of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever. And he calls the Son God. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And then down to verse 10, you, Lord, still speaking of the Son, laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed, but you are the same, and your years will have no end.
Yep. So it's a powerful, because again, what they just affirmed could only be true of Jehovah, that he's the eternal creator, that he's unchanging, and this could only be true of Jehovah. The writer of Hebrews says this is about the Son. And what's powerful about this, and in my experience, there's been a common response that I've gotten is they're caught off guard because most likely you've shown them something they have never seen before. Because and we figured this out. This was our big takeaway at the end of everything was get them off script. Because Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is true for a lot of other groups as well, but they're trained to respond to very specific texts. So John 1, they can respond to that in a comatose state, know. But if you can show them something they've not seen before, to get them off script, to get them thinking about something new, that's when the Holy Spirit can do some of his best work. And a lot of times the response, and this was the response I got, was, I've not seen this before. I need to think about this a little bit more. And that's where we use that opportunity of, hey, that's fair. Would you get back to me? And we actually exchanged phone numbers, and we're working on scheduling a follow-up meeting to talk through and to really press this home because, there's in the XJW community, specifically those who have left the Watchtower and have embraced Christ truly. There's a common theme you find is typically that journey started when they ran into a Christian who knew their stuff and didn't back down and yet lovingly challenge them.
Wow.
And so that's what we wanted to do. Wow. We wanted to put that stone in their shoe, as Greg Kokel says, and plant that seed and hopefully have some follow-up conversations to show them this is who Jesus truly is and this is his gospel.
That's good. And one of our values at Apologetics for the Church is not just a one-off conversation, handing a gospel tract and never see that person again. Our goal is to build relationships with unbelievers so we can follow up and we can continue the conversation. And that's where the real fruit lies. It's great. I mean, if there's no other way to just share the gospel or talk to someone about their soul and what they believe in spiritual things, and you don't see them again, you can't really help that. But our attempt should always be to follow up for further conversation, because once they get to know you and see your life as a Christian and hear your continual speaking of the truth, that's far more effective than a total stranger sharing it with them, and then you never see them again.
Yeah. And one of the other priorities, our goals here at the ministry is to equip ordinary believers to be able to do this as well. And through this 8-week study, we really did find you can do this too.
Yeah.
Listener,
this is not outside this is the
not
ability of most Christians.
Yeah. And through simple training, preparation, that's one of our goals too, to be able to train others to do this too, and to give them that assurance of you can do this. God will give you the courage and equipping to do it. And this was a great test case to see how this would go. And I think it was a phenomenal success.
That's good. Any last words on Jehovah's Witness and what you did with the interns that you think people would be interested to hear?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, continue to pray for them. This is a group that, unfortunately, a lot of Christians tend not to engage, whether through fear, intimidation, or just they don't have a clear goal going into the conversation. And so there's not a lot of intentional outreach and witness to the Jehovah's Witnesses. One of my prayers, I think one of our prayers, is that we would help equip the church to reverse that the church would be ready and equipped to engage them with the true Christ, with his gospel, and that if the Lord blesses our efforts, that we would see many of these witnesses leave and embrace the true Christ. And so that's what we are about. That's what we want to do. And so pray for these individuals, that the church would rise up and meet them and engage them with the gospel. And that's our goal.
Well, thank you for watching. I hope this has been a benefit. If you'd like to help support our ministry, you can go to our website, apologeticsforthechurch.org, and click on any amount of support to allow us to continue to do that. As we mentioned, we have 6 new regional interns this year from New York State down to Florida, and Jeff is leading their training over Zoom, and then in summer 2026, we'll bring them to Lancaster for a 3-day intensive, and they will also participate in our next event, which is on August 8th, Saturday, August 8th, Every Believer Equipped Conference, primarily focused on high school and college students, but of course everyone is welcome. And those interns will be presenting workshops there. If you are interested in an internship with us, we are now taking applications for 2027. The commitment is a 2-hour Zoom meeting once a month, probably 5 to 6 hours a week in reading. And Jeff gives you lots of homework to do so that you have a concentrated study of the basics of apologetics, and then a 3-day intensive in Lancaster with us for further training in the summertime. So if you're interested in that and can commit to that, we would be happy to hear from you and start the application process. May God richly bless you as you continue to look for opportunities to engage unbelievers with the gospel and to do it well.